Your CEO is asking you to create a P&L forecast for the next year in under 10 minutes. So you're given here the financial data for the last 3 years for Wayne Enterprises. And if this is Wayne Enterprises, that means that your boss is the Batman. And if the Batman is asking you to do anything, well, you just do it. Okay, so we are given the financial data for the last 3 years, 22, 23, and 24, and we need to create the P&L forecast quickly for 2025. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create a sound financial plan for the next year using sound financial logic, but do it quickly in under 10 minutes. So if this sounds good to you and you're a fan of Bruce Wayne, let's dive right in. All right, guys, let's dive right in. We're looking at the P&L for 2022, 23, and 24 for Wayne Enterprises. These figures, of course, are in billions. Just kidding, these are just US dollars. And these are the revenue and cost of goods sold and all of the operating expenses data for the last 3 years. And we're supposed to create the P&L for 2025. So the first step is going to be to create the revenue forecast. Once we nail down the revenue forecast, then we can go ahead and forecast cost of goods sold and operating expenses as a percentage of that revenue. So the most important and difficult things usually is to nail down the revenue forecast for the upcoming year. So let's take a look. Okay, so looking at revenue, in 2024, revenue was $80 million. The year before that was $54 million, and then it was $27 million before that. To be able to forecast revenue, what we're going to do is look at three factors. The first one is going to be to look at the past growth or slowdown. So we'll look at the year-over-year growth or slowdown of that growth and figure out what percentage of revenue or what is the percentage of growth in revenue year over year. So we'll insert a row here. And we'll say the growth in 2023 was equals, open parenthesis, the number of revenue in 2023 minus revenue in 2022, close parenthesis, divided by base year. Your base year is always going to be the initial year. And that's going to give us a number. We're going to make it in percentage format, 99%, almost doubling year over year. We can drag this to the right. And that's going to give us the growth in 2024, which was 47%. And then we can say, okay, so revenue grew by almost doubling and then grew by 50%, so kind of halved. And we can say that the growth was this year divided by the growth last year, that was 48%. Therefore, we can make an assumption that the growth is going to slow down by half again in 2025. So we create a column here for 2025. And we'll say the revenue is going to be revenue from prior year times 1 plus open parenthesis, the growth from last year multiplied by the growth slowdown. We close the parenthesis and hit enter, and that's going to give us $99 million for 2025. Therefore, under this assumption, the growth in revenue is 23%. So we'll take the 23% and we'll plug it here and we'll say based on this analysis, we get 23% growth in revenue. The second approach that we will look at is the investor expectation. So investor expectation means that what are the investors expecting out of this business? Is it acceptable that this revenue is growing by 10%? Maybe. Is it acceptable that it's growing by 70%? So what the investor is expecting is important in determining the effort that the company is going to go to get that target accomplished. So in this case here, the investor expectation happens to be 30%. So we'll put that in under investor expectation, and we are gathering this data so we can get an average between the past growth or slowdown and the investor expectation, and our third factor, which is the market share or opportunity, right? So we'll look at the market share and the opportunity that we have, gather the data on that, and plug it here to figure out the percentage. So when we are assessing market share, we'll begin an analysis here to just analyze the market share. We'll say, what is our current market share? We'll start there, right? So our current market share happens to be 8% in this case. So let's put that in percentage. 8% is the current market share. Once we know what our current market share is, we can say what is our projected or targeted market share in 5 years. So target market share is 20%. Put that here. So we know our current market share and our target market share. We'll put in our addressable market or the market opportunity. In our case, it happens to be $1 billion. So we put that in. Our current market share is 8%, which is the $80 million that you see here in 2024. We'll say we want to get to 20%, which means that in 5 years, we need to get from that number all the way down to 20%. So that means we have 2025, 2026, 2027, 28, and 29. So we are incrementally going to get to 20% over 5 years. So we'll say, okay, the difference between 20% and 8% is 12%. We'll divide the 12% by 5. So we'll say that to 12 divided by 5. And we need to increase every year by 2.4% to get the 20%. So let's plug that number here. So we'll say this equals the 8% plus 0.024, and that will give us the 10 and a fraction percent. For 2026, it will be the same thing. It will be equal the previous number plus the 2.4% that we talked about. So we got this number, and then we can drag it down, and we'll get the growth each year until we get to 20% in a 5-year plan. Okay, so that means that in 2025, we expect our market share to be 10%. 10% of the $1 billion would be an even $104 million in this case. So $104 million, let's plug that number in here to see what the growth is. So if the number here is 1.4 or $104 million, the growth is 29%. So we'll plug in the 29% here, right? And now that we've addressed all 3 factors, the past growth, investor expectation, market share opportunity, we can get an average of these 3 numbers and say average, and just take an average with an Excel formula equals average. Take these 3 numbers, and the average is 27%. Okay, so we know revenue is going to grow by 27% based on this analysis. We are comfortable having done our diligence in this case. So let's go ahead and plug that in. The revenue will be equal to prior year number multiplied by 1 plus this average number that we got here. So it's going to be 103 and 5,000. Okay, so now we have the revenue number for next year. If you're enjoying my style of teaching and ready to invest in a comprehensive financial analyst course, be sure to check my FP&A Academy, where I teach you the entire function of the financial analyst over the course of 8 hours. If you're interested, check out the link in the description below. We begin by establishing a 5-year financial plan for the company. Then we draft together the budget for the upcoming year. We then learn about the financial statement analysis using real-life data. We finally discuss the best practices in creating management presentations. If you're interested in joining me in a course, find the link in the description below, head over to the website and check out the detailed curriculum. All right, great. So we just figured out revenue, which is the most difficult piece in our forecast. Now we'll go ahead and forecast cost of goods sold and operating expenses based on a percentage of revenue. So we'll make some room here for that forecast. And again, this file is available for download in the description below. And we'll go ahead and create our analysis. So for cost of goods sold and operating expenses, we'll check the percentage of that amount from revenue. So we'll say for 2022 and 2023 and 4, we'll create columns here for them. We'll say the percentage for cost of goods sold equals the cost of goods sold figure divided by revenue of that year, right? And let's format that as a percentage, and that is 54% for 2022. Now we'll go ahead and drag that number down and across, but before doing that, we'll put a $sign before the row number of the base of our denominator so that when we drag it, it doesn't change. So when we drag that across, that will give us the percentage, and we drag it down, it's also going to give us the percentage of that number. The same thing can be done for the other items that we have under operating expenses. So we'll go here, we have a chunk of expenses here, we'll paste it, and then we'll paste it here as well for research and marketing. Same thing for G&A. So now we have all these percentages. We can go ahead and calculate an average for these percentages. So we can say average equal average these three figures, and this forecast, or this format rather, and it's 53%. Let's drag that down. And this is just the average of these figures. We have empty rows here that we don't need, so we'll just remove that. Okay, great. So now we have these figures. We can go ahead and calculate that change. So for 2025, cost of goods sold, it's going to be equal to the revenue number that we just forecasted times the average percentage of revenue, right? So it's going to be 54 million. And before we drag this down, we'll just fix the revenue number in place by hitting function F4, and then that's going to put dollar signs to fix the number in place, or the cell in place, so when we drag it down, it doesn't change the base cell. So let's go ahead and calculate the rest. We will add our total lines. So we have total cost of goods sold here. We'll add that as well. Gross profit and gross margin. And that will give us a check on the business. We can see here the gross margin is dipping down from 47 to 46%, which is fine. If you see that number changing drastically, like 20%, then you know you have a mistake in your calculation, but it's in the same ballpark, so we're okay with that. Let's sum the other lines. And total operating expenses. And then EBITDA. For the non-operating expenses, we'll look at interest, which most likely is going to resemble the number that we had in the last year. For tax, we'll leave that here in a second, because we'll get back to it once we figure out whether we have a net income or loss. But for depreciation, that's also going to most likely align with last year. And that's going to give us a net income or loss here of negative 42 million. So we know that we're not going to have any tax liability or tax expense. So we'll say that's going to be 0. So this is a quick way. You see, we started with revenue. Revenue is the most difficult number to forecast. You need to show some sound logic behind the way that you're forecasting it. And then we work our way into forecasting the other costs as a percentage of that revenue. That's it for today's video. If you liked it, give it a big thumbs up and download this file, link in the description below, for Wayne Enterprises P&L. And I'll see you in the next video.